Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third talk in the leadership lecture series of this semester. Today's speaker is Dr. G. Venkat. Dr. Venkat is a serial entrepreneur, investor, speaker, and author who is a true technology enthusiast. He is a venture partner at Naya Ventures, where he identifies and invests in early stage startups. He helps portfolio companies with corporate strategy, technology strategy, and revenue models. His areas of focus include AI and machine learning, Internet of Things, distributed computing, big data and analytics, cloud and mobility. Venkat serves as an advisor to several startups and is a board observer and strategic advisor to Hyperverge, KeepTracks, DocSync, and Telestacks. Venkat launched an e-learning platform recently called Bitwise that is applying AI and ML to adaptive and personalized computer science education for students in grades K-12. Venkat holds a BTech degree from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, MS and PhD in interdisciplinary studies from the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa. The topic for today's lecture is Flights of Fancy and Asking for Trouble. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Venkat on the podium.
So before I start off, one correction. I'm not Dr. Venkat. I did not submit my dissertation. So I'm just all but dissertation. So good, So I'm glad, we are getting started here. So as students are trickling in, I want a show of hands. How many of you really want to be here? How many of you were forced to come here? Okay, so it's like, and I want to also get one more question out of the way, okay, before we get started. So, during my time when we were in, I graduated in 92 from here, right? So 88 to 92 I was here. Every batch, kind of has their likes and dislikes and, your favorite subjects and not so favorite subjects. I'm very curious to know what is the unpopular subject these days in IIT Madras? Huh? Transport phenomena. Okay. I'm just curious, so it's, we're all friends here. Anything else? Or which are the most popular subjects where you can't even get in? Because, now I think a lot more students also, right? We were only like 250 students, so now like 800 students or so every batch. So any subjects you really want to desperately get in and not able to get in? Economics. I think in our time it was German. Like you'll have to wake up before everybody else, or overnight you have to stand in line to get into German. So of course I didn't get into German. So I had to go to English 1, English 2, the usual. Okay, good. So let's get started. So I wanted to address actually two topics today. Okay, one I titled it Flights of Fancy, because in order to embrace entrepreneurship and be an entrepreneur, you kind of got to be a little bit crazy. You got to think out of the box, and you got to have a vivid imagination as well, right? So that's why I titled it Flights of Fancy. And then asking for trouble is basically my take on the whole phenomena of internship. When I was here at the Institute, we didn't have really any compulsory internship, so to speak of. We had to go to industrial training, but we made a nice trip out of it and went all around the country to different locations, and we kind of visited industries and had fun. So that is what we called as our take on internship, but of course things have changed. And I also actually worked, this summer, I actually worked with some of the students. I sponsored some interns, and I also wanted to bring that perspective and experience, and share with the audience here. Because I do believe that, when you're in college and you have ideas and you want to pursue entrepreneurship, I believe that entrepreneurship and internship kind of go hand in hand, and they can actually help. So I'm actually pretty thrilled that now internship is actually mandatory, in some sense here. So that's actually really fantastic. Now, I've actually, a little bit about myself before I jump into this, topic. I think thank you so much for that great introduction. So I've actually tried my hand at a variety of things, only because, I want to keep on learning, and that's what makes me want to do different things. Every few years I try to do different things, and I've never done an education startup before, but here I am trying to do something and learn in the process. So that's me. I'm constantly learning even today. And my contact information is there, so feel free to reach out by email or at any time. So that's why I put it out there. So I love Dilbert Comics. How many of you love Dilbert Comics? Everybody loves it, right? So I pulled this out because I know that if you look at the abstract of my title, I said I'd also address venture capitalism and about funding and the whole process along with entrepreneurship. So these are really this really related to the venture capital world that I've been dealing with the last few years, and also even prior. I had a company that I raised venture capital funding back in 2004. So I've been involved, and this kind of sums it up. But nothing could be further from the truth. Okay, so this is great for. Venture capitalists don't just become venture capitalists to take money from the rich and give to the poor, or so it's actually quite opposite to what is portrayed here. So keep that in mind. Why? You're going to see as we progress along the conversation, we're going to actually get into this a little bit and analyze this a little bit. And also, I want to leave some time for questions. Okay, so I'll try to. We have about an hour, so I'll try to wind the presentation in maybe 25 minutes or so that we can have some time for question and answers. So I wanted to jump in, okay, and take this on, this whole thing on from everybody has ideas, right? So let's call that a concept. You have a great idea. How many of you have actually seriously thought of launching a company? So there are a lot of hands here. So, and how many of you took that beyond just a concept or idea stage and actually built a prototype, a working prototype? One gentleman, few. So, but we saw a lot of hands where there was a great concept or idea, but then only few people chose to act upon it and actually build something out of it. So here, I'm just showing you a very high level view of, you have a concept, you have to translate that into the product. Otherwise, you're not going to know what's going to happen with that idea. Okay, so that is important. And then comes, once you have a product, then the whole thing kicks in, understanding your customer and so on, and you have to actually build a business out of it. Business means actually selling something and somebody paying you for it, right? So that's going to happen, and then you scale. And as you go through this process, initially from concept to product, when it's just an idea in your head, nobody is going to come and give you money and fund you, right? Because nobody knows if 2 weeks later you have a change of heart and say, you know what, I'm going to do something else. That happens all the time, right? Even how many ideas have you had? It's not just one. We are all, bright people teeming with ideas all the time, but then some idea catches your fancy. That's why it's called a flight of fancy. It catches your fancy so much that you kind of get passionate about it, at least for a little bit. For a week, 2 weeks, you're talking about it to your friends, you're kind of researching it, trying to find out a little bit more, and then probably you convince yourself or some other idea enters your head, and then you move on to the next idea. Am I correct? That's what happens to most of us. That happens to all of us, right? But when you do chance upon that one idea that you really feel that is something really passionate, you feel passionate about, it is important that you act on it, not just for that 1 or 2 weeks, but maybe beyond it to actually conceptualize something out of it. And for that, you really don't need a whole lot of money or anything like that, right? You may need some money ultimately to develop it into some working product, but to actually go and create something or hack something out of it, you don't really need. And if you do need, that's where you need a minimal amount of money to buy supplies or buy things, or if it is software, all you need is a computer and maybe get together with a couple of friends. And I, by the way, I visited the Center for Innovation, and we never had anything like that when we were here. That's amazing. You got, you have a lot more support these days to go and try out your ideas. And so that's basically the first step. And that step, taking it from an idea, making it into a more tangible concept, and going to a product, building a product is very important before you decide to abandon it. At least build it and see for yourself what it is. And you'll see a lot of little sentences sprinkled everywhere that I've picked up, in different places because they resonated with me. And you're unique just like everyone else. So that's, what you got to remember. We are all unique, but just like everybody else. And generally, if you look at the funding model, if you're curious about, hey, how do things get funded and what happens? Initially, you self-fund it, or you put your, your sweat and tears and get other people together, and That's where you go from a concept to some kind of a product. And at some point, your friends or family may give you some money. And then when you have a viable product and you want to make it into a business, you actually establish a company, then you go and try to get some seed money. Then eventually, as you build a business, you go to what is called as a Series A, Series B, and beyond. I'm simplifying it, but this is kind of how the roadmap looks. So you just cannot come up with an idea, put it on paper, and say, I need some money to go build. It doesn't happen just like that. There is a series of steps that happen for you to be able to eventually go raise funding. And another thing is, if you can build something without raising money, that's the best way to actually build a company. So that's called bootstrapping. So if you have a service, and especially if it's a service idea, you really don't need money at all. You're providing a service and you're getting paid for it. So it's basically you don't need. You only need funding where you have to build a product for a length of time and you need to have a bunch of people helping you build it in that case. But even then, until you're able to bring some prototype out, you're not going to be able to go and immediately raise money. Okay? I'm sure you guys know all this already, but I'm probably just reinforcing some things. And now, if you remember the original Dilbert comic that kind of made light of the venture capitalist, here is the vulture capitalist, as some people like to call them, right? So, if you take money from somebody else, believe me, they will, come after you. They will be pestering you. They will be troubling you. So you will have a boss that will keep knocking on your door. So that is the flip side of going and trying to raise money when you want to build a company. So you will be constantly, you will have to be answerable to somebody else. So keep that in mind. And also with, and when you have an idea and you're pursuing and building your idea, you're going to find a lot of people giving you a lot of input. But at the end of the day, you have to filter out some of that input and understand what is important for you, and basically process the inputs you get from everybody else and act on certain inputs that are objective and that you should act upon. So that's what I'm trying to portray here. Okay? So now, this is another important thing, right? Everybody, we said we have an idea, right? So the other important thing is not to just wait. If you wait around for 2 months, the idea is still an idea. If you have the best of intentions. So you can't wait. You just get started. You have to do something about it. If you don't do something about it, if you procrastinate, nothing is going to come out of it. So you can't wait. Just got to act upon it. And you have to be relentless, because when you start working on an idea, you're going to face a lot of obstacles. So you're going to face every step of the way. There are going to be a lot of obstacles. Be it finding other co-founders, be it you may not be an expert in everything about your idea. Finding other people, solving a problem. You talk to people and people will shoot it down. You're going to find a lot of obstacles along the way, and you got to be relentless. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to achieve various milestones and keep progressing. And the third point is basically which 18 hours of the day you want to work, right? All I'm trying to say is you got to work really hard. It's not going to just come easy. As much as you see somebody doing really well and achieving fame and so on, the reality is that there is no substitute for hard work. It is hard work, and you work many sleepless nights, and you work for a few years to make anything successful. So that is a reality. So if you think, oh, this is something I want to do because I want to make a buck and sell the company and flip it and all the things you read in the media, that's not the reality. The reality is it's just hard work building a company. It's probably a lot easier going and working somewhere else for somebody else. So that's the thing. So keep that in perspective, and don't try to pursue something because you think that's going to make you rich and famous. You got to pursue something because you got to be passionate about it. That's the only way you'll sustain the work. You'll work and actually surmount your obstacles and make it happen. So that's very important. And on the just on the lighter side, this quote from Isaac Asimov. I'm a big fan of Isaac Asimov. So those people who think they know everything are a great annoyance to those of us that do, right? So now, so what is this, right? How do you, so far any questions? I mean, I don't mind if you have any questions, because it's a logical point where I want to move on to the next stage and get into a little more, deeper topics. So any questions so far? Yes?
So you're talking about working hard and working 18 hours a day. So me as a student, how should I cope up with my academics and the startup on which I'm working, or the idea on which I'm working?
I mean, when I say 18 hours a day, I just meant hard work. So yes, you got to juggle a couple of things, right? And as and if you ask some of the older gentlemen, people with less hair, who have families, kids, you have to juggle everything. I mean, that's life. You got to learn how to juggle and prioritize and work. So in your case, you'll be prioritizing academics and looking and pursuing other things. And then you have also weekends, you have other time, or so it's basically what is passionate, what is making you tick. And you don't have to launch a business immediately, right? It takes time, research and doing a lot of groundwork. You could do a bunch of those things, maybe tied to some of the bachelor's thesis that you'd be doing. So in fact, when to share my own experience, I was very passionate about computer science, but I was working here I was here in the aerospace department, but I had started programming when I was already in 3rd grade. And so by the time I came to high school and college, I actually was quite a seasoned programmer. So I ended up doing my bachelor's thesis a lot more serious than what normally you would find people doing a bachelor's thesis, that I ended up writing some software and so on. And I was able to, that way get an outlet for my creativity and what I wanted to do. And that helped me later on in life. So it's how you want to approach, balancing your, what you want to do in terms of some ideas you have and your academics. But I would say definitely place #1 priority on academics, right? That is really important. You hear of stories of Bill Gates dropping out and Zuckerberg dropping out, but those are exceptions than the norm. And there are a lot more people that dropped out that didn't go anywhere. So it's very important that you do get your degree, finish your degree. And when Hyperverge, when I helped Hyperverge out 2 years ago, Vignesh, their CTO, was still in college. The first thing I told him is, we'll fund you guys, but you cannot, drop out. You have to finish your degree. Are you sure that you're going to do that? That was my concern when Hyperverge came along, and we found that some people were still in college. So definitely, you have to balance it and then, figure out a way to launch it as you come out. We have a lot of things in the ecosystem here, incubation cell, and then the research park. So leverage all that to the best of your ability while you're in college, and find good, college is a great place to find co-founders. And then a couple of years you build it up, and then you have the ecosystem to go launch it and make it successful. Did that help you?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So now, coming back to, what exactly is, the magic of building a company, right? At the heart of you being able to build a successful company is the business model. And there are a lot of questions that you have to address. So things like, who is my customer? What do they want? How much will they pay? So it's really important, I'll give you a funny story, there is, this husband that comes running along, and the wife says, can you go to the store and can you buy a bag of rice? And if they have tomatoes, get 6. Guess what happened? He came home with 6 bags of rice. The wife is like, why? He said, if they have tomatoes, you said 6. So it's important to understand, how you perceive your customer or potential customer, and understand the requirements. What is the market speaking to you? So when you build your product, if you choose not to listen or you listen incorrectly, you're going to end up going in a direction and building something that nobody would want. And that happens a lot. A lot of times people build something that nobody wants. And just to put in perspective, right, hardly like 10-15% of startups go to the next level. Majority of them fold within the first couple of years, precisely because they have not been able to figure out whether this customer really needs the product. So that's actually very important. So who, how, what, when, how much will they pay? So if you build something that costs you $1 million to build, but you're only going to get like, $1 for it, then there is no business in it, right? So unless there is a real viable business, then there is no company. You can build a great product, but there'll be nobody using it, or people will want it for free. So the business model is at the heart of it. And there are a lot of research that you got to do. Understand your customer before you build anything. Interact with potential customers. Then start building, and keep constantly checking with your customers so that you're heading in the right direction, building the right thing that they want. And you have to have a strategy around it. You cannot build everything in one day, right? We cannot do that. You got to take baby steps. It takes time. So there is a lot of skills that are needed around this business model. And one person typically cannot bring all these skills, which is why it's important to find like-minded people who kind of subscribe to that vision, and you have a team, the co-founding team that goes about and executes different aspects of the business, right? Some people focus on the technology, somebody focuses on the operations of finance, somebody focuses on the sales and business development. So very loosely, all these things, end up, at the heart of it is the business model. You crack the business model and get, kind of peel up all the other layers, then, you will be able to build a successful business. You will be able to actually launch your idea successfully into a business. And if you rest, you rust. So generally, it's good to keep, and you don't have to build a company, but generally keep learning. Don't just rest your brain after you graduate. Constantly keep learning. So that's one thing I always emphasize. So have you seen like people, wondering, especially in class. So I also taught at the University of Alabama for 3 semesters. So, you see people kind of, lost in thought. That's because, you're usually in unfamiliar territory. That's why you're lost in thought. And that's what this landscape is like. So, because if you're a first-time entrepreneur especially, you could get lost. No pun intended, but that's what happens. It's not like you're kind of getting lost. It is unfamiliar territory, so it is easy to get lost. So that's why, you need to get a good support system. And IIT Madras, there is a fantastic support system with the IIT MEF, the IIT Madras Entrepreneurship Forum. So where, you get mentorship, and especially the companies that are in the research park are getting a lot of mentorship. So leverage the ecosystem, leverage the alumni, leverage the network, who can actually, help you navigate, at least they'll give you share their knowledge, share their perspectives. You have sounding boards. So you don't have to get lost in unfamiliar territory, because some of these terms, you may not even understand what they mean, or in your context what they mean. But typically an idea, it's not enough if you just have an idea. Like I said, you have to figure out the business case behind the idea and convince yourself that that's something you want to build. Now your idea could be a social enterprise, which means, or a not-for-profit, where you don't really need to care about the finances so much, but there also you actually, in some sense, you need to, because even if you want to go and build a not-for-profit, you still need money. You still need to employ people to work with you, and they may want to get paid at some point. So the idea needs to have a business case, regardless of if you want to go build a not-for-profit, you want to build a social enterprise, you want to build a for-profit, whatever you want to build, there needs to be a business case behind it as to who you're targeting with this product or service, why would they want to use it, and how are you going to, what are the financial mechanics behind it. And now, there are also a lot of incubators and stuff. So when you're in college and you want to launch something, that's a great time to incubate your idea for a couple of years so that it can kind of, build up the idea and you can graduate that idea into the next stage. So that is a possibility. Of course, if you're already out of college or you're in the real world, you may not have time to incubate your idea, so you accelerate your idea in that case, right? And some of the things you would need, right? You have to have a viable financial model behind it. You have to think about building up your team, the skills and the various resources that you would need. Again, there is always going to be competition. You cannot assume that you're the only guy doing it, because if you're the only guy doing it, I mean, you would assume that 10 other people are doing it. Otherwise, if you're the only person doing it, why did somebody not think of it? It's not that, most of the ideas that we come up with are just iterative. Even though they are some kind of innovation, it's not like suddenly something totally out of the blue. Those are really rare. So typically, your idea is, that industry or that market kind of exists, and you might be improving something or building upon that market. You may not be creating a whole new market from the ground up overnight. That is pretty rare. So in that sense, you have to look at differentiators and a competitive advantage. What advantage would you have over competition? Then do you have unique patents or intellectual property, depending on what you're doing? If it's a services industry, probably not. But if you're building a very unique technology and innovating, then you might have intellectual property associated with it. And eventually you got to figure out who are initial customers, who's willing to try it, even for free. If people are willing to spend their time and try it, that's something for you to get a better understanding and feedback, and figure out what is called as a product market fit. So what the market wants and what you're building are typically not going to match. It's going to take a set of iterations before you're able to match what the market wants to the right product. And when that happens, then your product starts taking off because now people want to use it. So that's typically what is called as a product market fit. And then you can generate revenue at that point and then get seed investment or other investments to scale. There is also one more term called a minimum viable product, or MVP. So that minimum viable product is the first stage where you can actually give it to a customer who can start using the product. So any questions at this point? Any question? So now, the other question that I keep hearing a lot, especially the last few years where I've been a venture partner with Naya Ventures, is a lot of startups in different stages of where they are come up and say they need 500K, they need 200K, they need money, otherwise they can never build the product, or they need the products with money so that they can actually build and launch. So you hear, always it comes back to people always want to give a reason for why they're not able to build it, but they need this big amount of money, only then they can go build. And for that, to put that in perspective, here are some amazing companies, and you see the initial amount of money that they actually used to actually build the company. You know, HP, of course, was probably long time ago, but still $538. And more recently, GoPro, which, you know, even our plan is the submersible vehicle, right? You guys know in the research lab, they actually use a GoPro camera. And GoPro started with just 164,000, of which some of it was like, you know, half of it was like just savings and half was borrowed. Whole Foods is Dell. Dell started with just $1,000. So there have been a lot of big companies built that started with very minimal investment that was enough to actually build out the first generation of their product. So don't think that you need a large sum of money to then go assemble a team, then build a product, then go sell. Because that route is never, you know, in fact, that is actually going to ensure that you're probably not going to be very successful. You got to think a little bit out of the box to be able to solve financial problems, you know, upfront. And you don't need really a lot of money to build the first generation of your product. You got to get a little bit creative in how you go about doing it. So now, this is where, you know, we come to the whole strategy behind how do you build this startup? How do I take a company? We talked about the business model, building it, getting to even a minimal amount of funding. Imagine that at this stage you actually built it. You built your product, you figured out your savings or, you know, from friends, a minimal amount, you built it and now you got some customers. Let's say that you kind of figured out the business model. From here, what do? How do you like take some minimal amount of seed money and actually get revenues and customers, and how do you get there, right? So I talk about 4 pillars, you know, the 4 strategic pillars. And at the same time, you can't get caught up in a lot of strategy, because however great the strategy, you have to have results. If you don't have results, it doesn't matter how beautiful a strategy you've crafted. But these, you know, again, these are my perspectives, my experiences. I've boiled it down to these 4 pillars. And the most important pillar that I focus on for any company, any startup, is the revenue strategy. How are you going to generate revenue? So I'll give you an interesting story. So this it's not a story, it's a real story. So we had a gentleman that approached us in the past for some funding. He wanted seed funding. And he said that he had this amazing startup idea where he had figured out how he can connect, you know, people that wanted some service to people that would provide the service. And he said that he knew both sets of people, and he would be the market maker, and he'll, you know, basically get a percentage of the transaction. And he wanted money to go build this platform. So my challenge was, hey, if you already know like 5-10 people that want a service and are willing to pay, and you know the 5-10 people here who are willing to provide, why don't you just pick up the phone and call them and facilitate the transaction and prove that they're really willing to pay and they're really willing to take it? Why do you need to spend 500K, build the platform, then make them log in, then realize the revenue 8 months later? This is a classic case where you have to really, you know, hustle, act on the idea, talk to them and facilitate the transaction. You don't need funding to facilitate a few transactions manually and prove that you can generate revenue. So again, so that's revenue strategy, is to really understand the customer, what they'll pay, why they'll pay, when they'll pay, and actually figure out that path to you know, generating revenue. So that's the revenue strategy. So that's very important. And I'm telling you, no matter what your idea, you will be able to think through and figure out what that revenue strategy is. If you cannot, then talk to people, talk to customers. Why will they pay or why will they not pay? Convince yourself and craft that chart that, because no matter how great a product you build, if you've built it the wrong way and if there is no proper revenue strategy, you will not just go beyond it. You've just wasted 2 years of your time or a year of your time doing it. Next is corporate strategy. So what is corporate strategy? So corporate strategy is where you look at, scenarios, business development, building relationships with potential customers. A lot of times, depending on the product or services are different, but products, customers may not immediately buy. Like if you have an amazing product and you want to sell it to a large company, you're going to probably spend 10 to 12 months just talking to them and understanding their needs and so on. So corporate strategy is all about building partnerships, alliances, understanding scenarios, doing the business development, and being able to do even the product strategy itself. As you talk to various potential customers, you will figure out what direction your product needs to go. So you will manage your product development, product management. So variety of things get under the umbrella of corporate strategy. The business strategy is pure and simple. How do you build your business? How do you sell? How do you market? How do you basically go about and execute and build your business? So that is your business strategy. And finally, execution strategy. So execution strategy is going to support all the other strategies, because you got to have resources, you got to have operations. If you have customers, you got to service your customers, manage those. You'll have legal. You have to have contracts. You have to. People would join you, leave you. There is attrition. So there is human resources. So there are a lot of aspects of execution that you can easily ignore or forget. But that's equally important, because if you can't execute, you don't have a business either. So it's very important to pay a lot of attention to being able to execute the best you can, and that is execution strategy. So typically, I break this into 4 areas and ensure that when you build a business, that you are paying attention to all the 4 pillars and don't end up ignoring a pillar, because that'll really come back to bite you at the wrong time. So any questions at this point? Okay. So now, we talked about however beautiful your strategy, you have to occasionally look at the results. So how do you look at the results of how you are performing as a company? How you are performing, how is your product being accepted by the customer? So we use this term called metrics. So you got to measure certain measurable quantities and figure out what they are telling you, what those quantities are telling you. And I've just given you a framework for thinking. This is actually a pretty deep and broad framework. Of course, this can be customized for your individual needs, but metrics are of various types. Some are, you can be very proactive, in understanding what they mean, or some metrics are an afterthought. You kind of measure them or analyze and understand them, and they become a little more retrospective to give you some indicators. And there are various categories of metrics. Is it process? Is it on finance? Is it something associated with your customer? Is it related to measuring the business value? So there are various categories. At the bottom, this is actually a pretty standard 5-step process here in Silicon Valley that they use for consumer related companies that like mobile apps and other companies that target consumers. So those 5 are a pretty standard framework, but I have actually built a more broader one on my own, so that because those 5 things of acquisition, retention, revenue are too high level to mean anything. So I went ahead and built out an elaborate framework for me to understand how I would, so if somebody is saying that I have a consumer product, I'm trying to market to consumers, using these metrics and measuring this over a period of time, say every week for a period of 5 months, 3 months, whatever, you'll be able to tell what direction this company is heading into. For example, how many downloads? You may, every month, your downloads may be increasing by 30%. That means you suddenly from, 10,000, you have like, 13,000 downloads next month, and so on, right? But that doesn't mean anything. What if people download but never end up using it? How many mobile apps do we download but we never use it after we look at it one time, right? We don't use more than 4 or 5 apps on our mobile phone. Anybody here uses 20 apps? Can I see a show of hands? Nobody, right? Nobody uses all the apps you download. then you don't have engagement. Just because you downloaded it and somebody puts a metric saying, yeah, I got downloaded 1 million times, doesn't mean it. It has to be a good metric, but that's not enough. So similarly, if you look at various things, okay, lifetime value is another one, right? If a consumer came and paid you one time and that's it, he's never going to come back. So even if you had 1 million downloads and each time they gave you a rupee to download, that's only 1 million rupees. But if you're able to have a lifetime value where the customer comes and keeps on getting engaged and every year they were going to give you a rupee, then you have a different business model. So what is the lifetime value of that customer before they decide never to use you? I'm just touching upon a few things. How many are active users? Like, Facebook, right? We very actively use Facebook or WhatsApp. But how many apps do you open up every day and use actively? Not many, right? So that app may be sitting there for 2 months before you open it. And there are some apps that are just a fancy. It's just a fad that kind of, after a week of you using it, you don't use it anymore. Then you're not an active user. So similarly, churn. If a better app comes along, you abandon this app and jump ship to another app. Then this app, there's a big churn. So these are all like metrics that are very important, for you to understand how your product is going to do, and then ask yourself, why is that happening? And then proceed to solve those problems. So this is important. So, and doesn't matter if your product is an enterprise product, similar metrics, there are a whole other set of metrics in addition to this that you're going to have to understand to know how your product is going to do. Is it going to do well or not? And what interventions can you do to actually get your product adopted? And so it's a constant process. And this goes back to the product market fit that we talked about. If you achieve a great product market fit and people want it, and if you have built the product by talking to customers, you're going to get the adoption. But you can't rest there because every couple of years needs change, market changes, conditions change, and something else comes along. So you can't just put it out there and think, I'm done, right? You have to constantly innovate on your product. So that's why the product management function kicks in, where you're continuously feeling the pulse and understanding what else the user wants, and then you're going to improve your product. It's a continuous process. Otherwise, you could lose product market fit and traction after a couple of years, and that's happened. Like, for example, when new disruptions come in, like Amazon came in and Borders and Barnes & Noble went out of business. Uber came in and the current taxi cab companies are struggling. So always disruptions come in, and if you're not a step ahead of those and understand those disruptions, you could lose traction with your product. So any questions here on this? I know this is pretty detailed. I'm not going into each and everything because we could be here for a couple of hours talking about it. But any questions on this framework? How many of you have already have built and tried to use a product with a customer? Okay. You have. Few of you have. So then you would probably relate to some of these metrics. And for others that are just, I saw a lot of hands where people have thought of ideas and have thought of building products. You have to understand some of these metrics when you go about building it and releasing it to customers. Now I'm going to switch gears. We talked about entrepreneurship on one side, and I know that the point about I'm a student. What do I do? I think there are some other things that you can do, and that's where we come to the internships. And the fact that there is a mandatory internship in your industry. Now, this is again my personal viewpoint. What will help really is, in the real world, it's not enough if you just are narrow and you understand your subject area or something. The real life is all about interdisciplinary areas coming together and interacting. So if you think of, you want to go and work in a certain field, you may not have all the skills today. So internship is a great way to learn skills that you normally don't in your branch or in your area of interest. You can actually go a little bit and bring that interdisciplinary factor into the equation and pick up skills that you normally cannot. And also, you may not have thought of things before in terms of even your career. If you intern, even I would say, summers you can use a few weeks and get exposure to various, career possibilities by interning at various places. And also, it's a good educational path. The learning that I talked about, the amount of stuff you learn by working hands-on and, in a real company, in a real world situation, it cannot, it's way more, even a few weeks, it will not equate you spending a whole 2 semesters and trying to do it by the books, right? It's a very different experience. You also get to network and connect with a lot of people. And that gives you a different perspective as you interact with people, and more importantly, you do gain work experience. So that's why I think even if you have entrepreneurial aspirations, I think it's really a good idea if you're able to intern in an interdisciplinary field and pick up skills for a couple of years that would allow you to actually be a very successful entrepreneur if you want to, pursue entrepreneurship in your own idea. Now again, Dilbert, right? My favorite. So this actually was Dilbert's take on IITians. I don't know how many of you would have seen this, but again, the reason I'm bringing this up is I have had, I'm an IITian, and I've had my own experience now this summer working with other IITians that I decided to take on an internship journey. I'm going to share some of that a little bit. Okay, so essentially, I'll just put it out there for 10 seconds. No point me repeating it. So you can. So this is what Dilbert Comics thinks of us IITians. So. Pretty funny, huh? But you know what? I look at the brighter side. They didn't focus on any other university out there. Not even Stanford or MIT. The fact that they wrote about IIT means something, that our brand is getting pretty good out there. So, okay. So I'll move on. And so this is, so before I get into this, right? The student internship program, as I called it, I'm sure that, how many, is anybody here who did the internship with Bitwise? No. Anybody here? Yeah. What's your name? Vamsi. Okay. So Vamsi, I remember you. Just that, when I meet you in person, I couldn't recognize you right away. Anybody else other than Vamsi who did an internship with Bitwise this summer? Okay. So I'm sure, both sides, I'm just, kind of making a little bit of fun out of it. So internships are typically, irritation, aggravation, and frustration on both sides. Okay, because the kids coming in really don't know what they're doing. That's the honest thing. And then companies that, bring on the interns, want something out of it because they, what we focused on was research. We said, hey, if you're going to intern with us, we want you to work and actually publish a research paper. So let's see if that is possible. So how do you define irritation, aggravation, and frustration? I can only do that with a story. I like to tell stories. So let me see if I can try to convey to you what I mean by irritation, aggravation, and frustration. So imagine that, two friends are talking, okay? So one friend comes and says, hey, what is irritation, aggravation, and frustration? This guy says, wait a minute, I'm going to show you. So he picks up the phone, randomly calls some number, rings, and then he says, is John there? That guy says, no, John is not there. This is the wrong number, Clearly that guy is irritated, right? Because he's in the middle of something and somebody called him. Now, this guy smiles at his friend and says, wait a minute. Picks up the phone, calls that same number that he called. Again says, is John there? No, that guy is kind of losing it. Says, Arey, I told you, right? John is not here. Why do you keep calling? So clearly that guy is aggravated. Now, this guy smiles and says, wait a minute. Calls that same number and says, I'm John, did I get any phone calls? That is frustration, okay? So that is how I can best convey what the internship process is like. But what I tried to do, and I kind of knew that I didn't want to go down that path, so I said, okay, let me put it in a little bit of a framework. Again, I like to, if you put things on paper and there's a clarity of thought, it becomes a little bit easier to manage it. So I kind of broke it down into work streams, and I said, here are the sub-streams, graphics, machine learning, marketing, core computer science, and my idea was to address some of those key topics, etc., etc. And we went and there were people that were interested, kids that were interested, and we actually I thought I had put a pretty clear framework in terms of getting, and I've worked with other interns before and done other things, but clearly when you have the pond in between two continents, no matter how much framework you put and whatever you do, you're still going to experience irritation, aggravation, and frustration. So, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to come back and do this again next summer, but I'm going to probably do it a little bit differently. And so I'm still figuring out how I could do it differently. But what I'll say from the experience is that if you want to intern and want to learn, you got to be really serious about that process. You got to not have like 20 different commitments, then you will not be able to do anything correctly. So you cannot do 20 things all at once. Nobody can. So you have to understand if this is what you really want to do, and then embark upon doing it. And when you do something, you have to do it wholeheartedly so that you can be successful and everybody can be not frustrated, aggravated, and so on. So that is kind of, and actually the institute has a lot to benefit also from its image. So what will happen is, and I think this is where it's going to go, at least that's what happens in the US, where internships are a pretty serious thing where companies come in, large companies come in, even Google and so on, Microsoft, a lot of people come in, and there is a process around it, and universities benefit now because not only the internship process, but that also is a precursor to companies coming in and identifying those same students for career opportunities later. So that's very important. So that is something keeping in mind. All the stakeholders can benefit. Basically, the students, the companies, and the institute, the brand, can all benefit if a proper, we can figure out a proper internship process that can be put in place. And importantly, that process has to be, anything has to be measured to know that that process is the right process and it can be tweaked and improved. So I leave it at that, but this was what the framework was, under which I came and worked with a few students as this summer as part of the internship. So we focused on artificial intelligence, we focused on core computer science. Also, since some students were interested in marketing and graphics design, we went out of the normal technology and said, okay, let's do that as well. And people have been, asking me about Bitwise. So I wanted to, and what was it that the internship was on? What is this Bitwise? Very simply, Bitwise is basically a company that is working on a platform that is bringing applied computer science education to every student in the world, but in a personalized manner, leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning. So that's Bitwise. And we work with some of the students on the internship. And this is Yogi Berra, was this baseball player who always came up with these funny sayings. So I want to conclude by saying that the future ain't what it used to be. So look forward to the future. I think everybody here has a very bright future, and you can write your future, basically, whatever you want to do. Thanks.
Guys, the podium is now open for questions.
Yes.
So basically, when you talk about all these technology and service companies coming up, so I want to just have a curious question on something.
Sure.
Let's say Uber started its operations in the US, since you mentioned it, and now Ola copied the concept in India. And
Yes.
similarly, Amazon started in the US, Flipkart started here, and Amazon also came in here.
Exactly.
So there is someone who is starting it, someone who is going to follow up. In that case, how does the first company even survive? Like, because there can always be something like, if I'm providing a service, he can take a smaller cut from the other person.
Yeah.
So in that case, it might even go to a free concept. In that case, only apps and all these things are one thing to work. So
Yes.
how does the first company even survive in that case? What is the business model change in those kind of situations?
Very good question. Okay, this is an excellent question actually, and I'm going to draw an analogy and answer you. Okay, I'm going to pick on the telecommunications industry, and I'm going to walk you through some things to show you how that industry, how it's relevant, right? So, when I went to the US to make a 1-minute call to India was like $2 or $3 a minute. And I saw over a period of 3-4 years, from 92 to 96, that drop all the way down to about $1.10, okay, about $1 at that time, okay? Now, what happened was, there was enough volume and enough, with the internet coming on, enough cables and things were laid, and enough volume that drove the prices down a little bit. Then what happened, over time, if you saw the whole SIP trunking and VoIP and other technologies entered, and the price continued to drop Today, after 20 years, it is completely commoditized. Nobody even pays for it. You can use WhatsApp and pretty much talk for free, right? It would be insane to consider paying to talk to somebody, you know. I wouldn't, but still, so what did those companies do? They had to continuously reinvent themselves, right? Then there is all kinds of acquisitions happen, mergers happen, new products and services happen, you know. So they let you talk from your legacy phone to some other phone. They help you bridge networks, or then you have cable, you have high-speed internet, different speeds of internet. So companies keep figuring out their business models and keep figuring out how to monetize and survive and move on. And some companies go out of business. MCI was a clear case of just went out of business. Sprint is struggling. There were some other mobile phone operators that went out of business. So that's what happens. And typically, it depends on the market. Many of these markets, macro markets, are large enough to support multiple people. Before Ola and Uber came, there were hundreds of cab companies. It was completely a fragmented industry. They leveraged, Uber really leveraged mobile technology and this no-cost commoditized network communications to be able to bring, and part-time. A lot of people want to augment money and make some 2 hours they want to drive every day and make some money. So it worked out beautifully that they married a few concepts and brought it together, leveraging technology, and they were able to build a business. Now, there's nothing stopping Ola from coming to the US. They can come into the US market if they so choose, but again, it's not easy because every market is different, and you enter the market the wrong way, like Chevrolet went into Mexico and named their car Nova, Chevy Nova. And you know what Nova means in Spanish? It won't go, no go. That means the Spanish thought that car is not going to go anywhere, and it was a disaster. So you got to understand the market before you enter a market. Everything from branding to naming to who the customer is. Customers are different. Even though you're offering the same service and customers sit in a car and go, it is very easy to trivialize and say Ola and Uber. They have very different business models actually. In fact, I was thinking about the same thing about Uber and Ola because I used Ola a bunch in Coimbatore before I came here, and I can tell you, like, I saw so many differences in their business model, it's not even funny. So it may seem the same to you, but their models are very different. And typically that's what it is. You build a product to your customer base where you're targeting that segment, and then if there is an opportunity to go beyond that, then you figure it out and go beyond that. Does that answer your question? Any questions? Yes, sir.
I'm a doctor, not a tech person, but an entrepreneur, doctor trained in management. So that gave me the confidence to boldly come. A lot of the concepts you mentioned are absolutely true. From experience, I can vouch for that. In particular, I want to speak about interdisciplinary aspects which you mentioned. And as you correctly mentioned, businesses are very, very complicated. I don't want to repeat what you said, but what you said is 100% true. A lot of youngsters come in and then come in this scenario and in this environment. Venture funding is also more easily available. I struggled for several years and finally I got it. I got a fairly decent thing. My problem is now, as you mentioned, services, not product development. It is on the e-commerce area in healthcare, in medical devices. This area is highly regulated. It has to be done right. You can't do medicines in this. It's illegal and doctors will object to it. No matter what technology you say, we are already experiencing the downside of technology. I mean, especially in India, we don't have that bandwidth. So, doing it right, doing it within the legal framework, taking into consideration all the rules and regulations. I find it very difficult to connect with technologists or tech persons, especially IT. Comparing with Vinod Khosla and seeing his website and seeing the enormous things in healthcare and medical devices which he has done and he has promoted and he has invested, there's almost zero in India. Because simply it doesn't click with us senior doctors and senior or bright technologists. It needs some working on. We have to work on that. I am finding it difficult to get a tech co-founder, though I have sanctioned funds, which is very ample. what you mentioned, the internship and all that, if you can help me, it will be there. And this will be a mind-boggling change in the way in which we do. So there is a lot of opportunities, possibilities in using tech. You mentioned Ola, Uber and all that. In bringing the similar benefits in the healthcare. In terms of cost, my business is not like some of the big players in deep discounting. From the beginning, it's positive cash flow. And like you mentioned, in each field, there is networking, there is deep understanding of the market, the peer colleagues.
So what I suggest is...
so the thing is to understand also the other discipline and then move along and try to contribute in the tech space and then take it forward.
So I think, if to summarize, you're having difficulty finding a technology co-founder who understands the technology aspects of it. So why don't we take this a little bit offline so I can understand what technology and then see if I can share any perspective with you. But
actually,
it's
again, it's
a common
not
problem.
development. It is already there, like Flipkart, that same tech platform to be used in the healthcare. We are not reinventing the wheel. Nothing new to be developed. The same thing to be brought in and then perhaps tweaked and to
So we'll
make
take
more
it, if you
efficient.
don't mind, we can take it offline. So let me understand a little bit more and then I'll suggest. But this is a common problem, right? If you have an idea and you want other like-minded individuals to join you, you have to, it is, that is a problem you have to solve to go find co-founders. If you think you need to bring co-founders, or in some cases you bring in early employees, who are senior
Investors
enough.
are asking for it.
Sorry?
Actually, we are not in favor of it. The investors want me to bring
Of course,
in co-founders
investors-
from the tech side because this is a tech platform.
Yes.
It's
So
only tech
as an
platform.
investor, I would say
But
the
as
same.
you correctly mentioned, execution is with us, doctors. It won't move. It hasn't moved till now here. Execution is with us, but to form the tech platform, we have to have a tech person as a co-founder. And this is the investors thing. We still haven't understood why. Because like I said, it's from the beginning, it's a positive cash flow. And I'm trained in management, financial management. So with all this, funds are coming in, but in execution of the tech side, I'm having a difficulty.
We'll take it offline. Okay. I'll understand more about your technology and I'll suggest. Any other questions?
Hello, Venkat.
Yes, hi.
I actually have two questions for you. Firstly, what are the different factors that a venture capitalist considers before deciding to invest in a startup? And secondly, suppose I have developed a service-based product, which is completely in a blue ocean area, and I don't have any competitors with a similar kind of product so that I can compare my product with that. So, as you're talking about revenue models, how can I develop a right price for such a service product?
So the first question let me address. So you're saying what criteria do venture capitalists look for to provide funding, right? So that is not an easy answer. Different venture capitalists may have different criteria. And as you can see, right, and the same venture capitalist may use different criteria and then regret why they invested in it. That also happens. So, but typically, right, they look for a solid team. It's very important, for a venture capitalist to believe in the team and the execution capability of the team. So they will, it's not like you meet them one time and somebody decides they're going to invest in you. So it needs, that confidence, they need to have that confidence in the team. That's very important. Then come all the questions, right? Is this a viable product? What is the revenue model? Who's your customer? Is it sustainable revenue? What is the market size? Venture capitalists are not going to invest if you think the market size itself is going to be like 5 million, and even if you're going to get 30%, no product exists and you're going to take the whole market, they're still not going to be interested in it. So there are a lot of criteria that they do look for before they decide. And some of these things you can also ask them for feedback and have a dialogue, and you start meeting, go and meet and talk to 2, 3, 4, VCs, and then you will start figuring out. But also before they do your homework, you really need to understand the market. What is the market size? So it's like, but again, venture capitalists are pretty smart. So I'll give you another example. So let's say you want to create a pizza company, and you go to venture capitalists for funding, and you say, the market is like, billions of dollars of pizza, That is being facetious, because you know very well that even though the global market for pizza is in the billions of dollars, it's not that you are going to be able to sell to every market, right? So having that kind of a market size is just waving numbers. You got to focus on a couple of terms. One is called the total addressable market. So within that, what is your total addressable market? So you could say that, hey, I am, in Chennai, and for me, the addressable market is this, 5 neighborhoods and how many households are there, and on average, how many pizzas they buy, and so on. And you might come up with like, hey, they spend 5 million rupees on pizza. That's still not enough. Even though that is your total addressable market, what is your serviceable market? If you can only hire 2 drivers and you can only go to 20 streets and deliver, your direct serviceable market is only worth, 1 lakh rupees. So that's what you need to really portray. You need to understand that first. If you're going to build a business and a product, you need to understand the overall market, the addressable market, the serviceable market. Really understand, you really need to understand, think through and understand for your particular product or service. Then if you really communicate effectively and then build your business model, your financial model, your pricing, you build that from the ground up. You do both a bottom up as well as a top down exercise, and then you will really understand whether you're going to be able to build a successful business. At least mentally you will know the picture where you stand, and then with effective communication with the VC and answering all their questions, you will be well on your way to raising your round of money if that's what you choose to do. Does that answer the first question? Okay. So the second question, can you repeat the second question? It was a little more elaborate.
Okay. Suppose I have developed a service product which is entirely new. I mean, there is nothing like that currently in the market.
Okay.
So I don't have any other company or any other product that I can compare my product with. So for such a product, how can I come up with what can I say for that? Correct pricing, an app pricing.
How you come up with the pricing? This is again a good question because nothing exists. Okay. But first of all, our customers, who is your customer? What type of, if it's an enterprise or a consumer, everybody has limitations on, what budgets they have and, what they'll be willing to pay. So it depends on the value you're going to add, right? What is the value that you're going to add, and what budgets would your customers have? Or are you supplanting some other product or some other way of doing things where, let's say, they're already spending, 5 rupees and they're already doing it a certain way, and you're coming in and providing a new product, but that product basically allows them to, completely throw away something else. So, for example, like, I've never had a landline now for 10 years. When mobile, technology became solid enough, I just disconnected my landline. For the last 10 or 12 years, I have not had a landline, only a mobile phone, right? So now I'd be willing to pay a premium for certain other mobile services because I freed up the money from the landline. So you got to think through, so pricing strategy is, you got to determine. So pricing strategy is a very important aspect of making a product successful. And especially with the enterprises, once you go to an enterprise and you sell, let's say you decide to sell it for, 1,000 rupees, you go to the next enterprise and you feel like, oh man, I sold it too low, I'm going to ask them for 5,000 rupees. That's going to be very hard because first of all, any other enterprise will say, I need to talk to your current customer. Where is your reference? And they're going to put contractually, a lot of enterprises in the contract, they'll say, you're not charging me more than your lowest priced, license. So then you'll be forced to sell it to them also for 1,000 rupees. So you got to be, so some of it, the pricing strategy is also in not locking yourself in, and so there's a lot of legal, contractual stuff involved also, especially when you deal with enterprises. Maybe with consumers, not so much. You can always say, this is a basic service, or you can consumer, if you notice, even the free services, they'll say, we reserve the right to change the services, reserve the right to change the pricing. So they do those kinds of things, right? So you don't have to get, with consumers, you don't have to get the pricing right the first time. You can still recover, you can do other things. But with enterprises, you got to be very careful because contractually you'll be obligated. And then you can't go and change the pricing on other enterprises because they'll want the same deal you gave somebody else.
When we consider companies like Ola, they first take the market by coming in, offering a very low price, and then gradually they increase the price.
Yes.
So which is a better strategy? Introducing a high price first, then lowering it, or the other way around?
That totally would depend on your particular service or product. I'll give you 2 different examples, right? So there are products where they come in, especially, they give you what is called as freemium model. So it's free. They say, for now it is free. Then as you start adopting and they build a customer base, they'll say, we'll still keep it free, but only for this, amount of usage, anything more than that you pay, because that means you're getting value out of it. So that's a freemium model where they came in cheap. But if you take Uber, for example, Uber came in, and of course, like Ola, they gave pretty decent pricing. But then what Uber did was, as they saw that the usage is going up, they introduced what is called a surge pricing. They said in the peak hours, if you want, you're going to pay 2 or even 3 times. So normally what would cost you $30 to go somewhere, they'll charge you $60 or $70 as surge pricing. But you're desperate, because if you want to go to the airport at that time, there's no choice, you have to pay. So again, so that's why market sets the price, eventually. And as things, and also certain things get commoditized over time, then the prices drop to zero. So that's all there. So, and pricing is never, it's not a fixed thing. Right? That's why it's called a pricing strategy. There's always, it's going to be, there's going to be changes. The price of oil varies, right? Price of gold varies. So typically prices vary. Market forces, Porter's forces, the 5 forces. Yes.
Sir, does a venture capitalist think about short-term gains, or it's like a long-term gain? Does it, like the saying, like retire rich, retire young? So is it something like that, and venture capitalist thinks, or how it works?
That depends on the thesis of investment, right? Some people, if you invest in a seed stage or early stage, there are 2 possibilities. The company is doing really well, then there is a series A, B, C, and so on. It all depends on the model and the fund itself and so on. So there are a lot of criteria that it's not a one answer. It's not just one answer. A lot of it depends upon how that fund is built. But typically VCs want exits. In a lot of cases they do want exits. But exits come in different ways, right? Exits can come by you selling the company off to somebody else, or exits can come for a VC even when there is an IPO. So there are different ways of getting exits. But at the end of the day, VCs are there to maximize their profits, so that the LPs that invested in the fund, they would have to return their, whatever they have promised to return them, how many ever, 5x, 3x, whatever it is. So absolutely, and they're measured by that. So yes, they want to maximize their profits. So whatever they'll do is to make sure that they maximize their profits. So in a sense, they look out for the fund, even though yes, they will groom the company, help the company, and so on. But at the end of the day, they are there to maximize their profits.
Venkat,
Yes,
you mentioned about venture funders becoming vultures in a later been little earlier in your talk.
Yes.
And it's like almost like riding a tiger. Does it scare away young entrepreneurs to get into venture funders?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, at least in the US, in Silicon Valley, it doesn't. It's accepted. I mean, if you're going to build it, you want to scale and grow, then if you need funding, you need funding. If you need funding, you need funding. So, but again, it's not that, every entrepreneur that wants to get funded gets funded either, right? Many of them don't. And if you've been out there trying to raise money for a year and talk to 20 people, believe me, everybody knows about you. So then people will be like, oh, you talk to them, why did they not fund you? So that can actually, actually work against you as well in a closed, thing where everybody knows a lot of other people. But it doesn't scare away anybody, It doesn't. I've not seen anybody get scared away. Yes, sir.
Joining the startup. I did my intern at Oyo Rooms.
Sorry?
Oyo Rooms
Okay.
this summer, and the kind of work they offer for intern is very random.
Very random.
Very random in startups. I saw people are working, not just interns; they're doing random work. So, how to decide whether to join a startup or not?
Good question. So even in the US, that's true. So, so there is this joke, right? So people hire interns because they have them run around, make them coffee or make copies of paper. And I know, but that is what is portrayed, it's pretty random, right? It is. So before you accept an internship, I think you got to ask the right questions and make sure that that is something that whatever you're getting into, you want to go and that's what you want to do. So, from a student perspective, that's what I would do. I'd first make sure that that is what I want to do. That's what I talked about, wholeheartedly immerse. And on the flip side, this also happens, where interns, say, I want to come and work, and then they may not show up at all. That also happens, right? Both ways. So it's that's why it's frustration, like I said, frustration, aggravation, irritation on all sides, right? So the best way to resolve that is to ensure that you have a real good dialogue with the company, understand exactly what would be your scope of work, what do you have to produce, and what you're going to learn, what skills you're going to learn in the process. And on the flip side, for the company also to ensure that, execute a contract with the university or with the intern, that this is what the internship is about, this is the scope of the work. So if it is signed off from both sides, then there is no ambiguity. Then there is expectation is set, and expectation can be met. So that's what I would suggest. I don't know your particular situation, how you ended up signing. Did you even sign any paperwork, or did you even know what work they were going to give you? Then if they're not clear about the project, then that is a red flag for you that they don't know what they want. So it could have gone either way, right? So that's a red flag for you. Then in that case, you have to make a call whether you want to go and roll the dice or not, stay away, right? That's So I don't know exactly what they made you do, okay? But if they just made you make copies and make coffee, then I'd say that's not worth your time. But if you were actually working but here is the thing, right? If you wanted to code, but they told you to go and build a financial model and on Excel sheet and think through and do some research and stuff, then your expectation was not met, right? So it is better to have a dialogue, whether it is a general internship where they'll make you do different things, or you're going to work on and what do you want to do. But on the same side, I can tell you that there are people that want to get that general idea of how a company works. I want operations. I don't want to do coding. I don't want to worry about technology. I want to learn about marketing and sales and other things. Some people may want to learn that also. So it's all a question of what the company has to offer and what the intern wants and having that right match. So I'll tell you this, okay? If you're going to join a startup, be prepared, to wear a couple of different hats, okay? The nature of a startup is they cannot, again, it depends on what stage the startup is, especially when it is early on. They expect, the core group, right? Let's say you're in the first 10 people, then expect that, as the startup itself figuring out its existence and its business model and stuff, you got to be prepared to wear a couple of different hats. But if the startup is a little bit further along and they are recruiting you specifically to code the front end or do certain things or to do social media marketing or something, then it becomes more specific, then you know what you're getting into. So it depends on, so even all startups are not equal. Startups are at different stages of evolution and so on. So you got to understand where you're coming in and what your role is going to be. But that would be clear. I mean, any startup would know if I'm going to have you wear a couple of different hats, or if I'm going to put you on something very specific and I'm hiring you for that. That much clarity, you should have a conversation before you get into this thing, right? So that's important to understand. Communication has to be there. That's very important.
Thank you for the knowledgeable talk, sir. It was an honor to have you here. I would now like to call Dean I&AR, Professor Nagarajan, to give the memento to Mr. Venkat.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure and honor. I'm very nostalgic, on this trip that I got to stay on campus and really soak and immerse. It's been a long time since I came back and stayed on campus. So I actually really appreciate the opportunity to be back here and talk to everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.